Tonight, the Trump-Pence face-off. This primary day with all eyes on Georgia.
Brian Kemp for 4 more years.
The matchup between Governor Brian Kemp and challenger David Perdue, pitting the former White House running mates on opposite sides.
Brian Kemp is a turncoat, he's a coward.
Plus, the president heads home after a 6-day tour of Asia.
And sex abuse scandal.
It's a culture of protecting power and position. It's not a culture that Jesus would model for us of caring for the least of these.
The fallout with the Southern Baptist Convention. All this and more.
Tonight on Faith Nation. All eyes on Georgia this Election Tuesday. Good evening, I'm Jenna Browder.
And from our Washington studio, I'm John Jessup. Another big primary night as polls close in 5 states across the South, from Alabama to Texas. These elections pave the way for this fall's midterms with plenty on the line. Yeah,
the most high-profile race is in Georgia, where the former president and former vice president have backed different candidates in the governor's race. It could be a preview of how some members of the Republican Party are willing to break with the former president.
CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka has been monitoring the races and joins us with the latest. Matt.
Well, former President Donald Trump focused a lot on Georgia after officials in the state rejected Trump's claims about the 2020 election. Trump is backing a challenger to Governor Brian Kemp and a challenger to Georgia's Secretary of State. Tuesday's results could show who voters are siding with.
I'm a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order, and I am here to support Brian Kemp in tomorrow's Republican primary.
Former Vice President Mike Pence threw his support behind Georgia's incumbent Governor Brian Kemp.
Brian Kemp is a turncoat, he's a coward.
It was directly at odds with Donald Trump, with the former president endorsing Kemp's primary opponent, David Perdue. Trump criticized Pence's refusal to not overturn the 2020 election during a Monday phone interview on the John Fredericks Show.
I'm very disappointed in Mike, as a lot of people are, and he's just very greatly disappointed in me. He had a great opportunity, and all he had to do is send it back to the legislatures.
Kemp was leading in the polls heading into Tuesday, and his win would be a big blow to Trump's endorsement power. But the former president's endorsement of Kemp's opponent still held weight with some Georgia voters.
I voted for Perdue, but I will vote for Kemp in the election. The reason I voted for Perdue was because I was so angry with Kemp when he did not support Trump in the the fraudulent election.
The winner is likely to square off with Democrat Stacey Abrams in November. Abrams narrowly lost to Kemp in 2018.
I will say this. I have listened to Republicans for the last 6 months attack me, but they've done nothing to attack the challenges facing Georgia. They've done nothing to articulate their plans for the future of Georgia.
But Kemp wasn't the only Georgia Republican in Trump's sights. Trump endorsed Jody Hice to take on Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger after Raffensperger rejected Trump's claims about the 2020 election. Raffensperger said he was focused on making sure the primaries ran smoothly Tuesday.
I really have my Secretary of State hat on right now, and so that's why I'm here today. I'm not going to any precincts today because I am on the ballot, but I want to just make sure it's running smooth.
And Georgia is a runoff state, which means if candidates in the primary don't get more than 50% of the vote, the top 2 vote-getters face a runoff in June. John and Jenna.
All right, Matt Galka, thank you very much. And for more on this, let's bring in CBN News Chief Political Analyst David Brody. David, a lot on the line, of course, in Georgia tonight in the governor's race. Polling does have Kemp in the lead. If he pulls it out, what does that mean, David, for former President Trump and the weight of his endorsement as we look to other races?
Well, I know the media is going to make a big deal about this when Kemp most likely is going to win tonight, and they're going to say, "Oh, it's egg on Trump's face," and to a degree, obviously that's true. Let me say a couple of things here. First of all, it's very important to understand when Trump loses as it relates to endorsements. He lost in Idaho a little while back, or I think it was last week. It's all kind of jumbling in my brain now, but he lost because he backed an incumbent that was going against a pretty popular, and more importantly, a very conservative pro-life governor in the state. We're seeing the same thing here with Kemp, all right? So this idea with Brian Kemp is that, he didn't back Donald Trump's claims in 2020, but overall, he's been a pretty solid conservative guy. He's not a Mitt Romney. He's not a rhino. So I think that seems to be the delineation point. In other words, if it's just going to be on the election itself, Trump's going to have a hard time with that. But if you notice, Trump, a lot of times his endorsements matter when he's taking on people that voted against him on impeachment, right? What is he, 7 for 7 of all these Republicans that are no longer or either running or lost because Trump endorsed the opponent? So look, I mean, that's the point. When it comes to a rhino, like a Mitt Romney type, so to speak, that's different. Brian Kemp seems to be more of the mainstream conservative, and that's the difference.
David, along those lines, by targeting Kemp as well as Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, both of whom rejected Trump's claims about the 2020 election, has the former president essentially made the primary season about 2020 more than anything else? And along those lines, again, will that work?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, John. Look at Raffensperger, for example. I mean, he has a real chance of losing tonight to Jody Hice. I mean, so that's going to be a big victory for Trump because remember, it was Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, really more than anybody. I guess technically the governor didn't have to certify the election, but it was Raffensperger that was really kind of the guy in the middle of all of this. So I think what we're going to see tonight is probably some sort of split, that Kemp will win and Raffensperger could very well lose, and that's going to be kind of a mixed bag for Trump. Which at that point, at this point, he'd probably take that.
Yeah, we'll see. David, how do either of these candidates stand up against Stacey Abrams, who narrowly lost to Kemp in 2018, Perdue or Kemp?
Well, it's going to be a toss-up, and let's be clear. As much as everybody makes a big deal about Donald Trump technically not conceding the election to Joe Biden, this just in, Stacey Abrams did not concede the election to Brian Kemp. Back when she ran for governor. So she's in the same boat. She never conceded that election. So anyhow, that's an important point to make at this point. But I will say this. I think it's going to be a toss-up if it's going to be Kemp and Abrams for sure.
David, four other states, Alabama, Arkansas, Texas. Any other narratives or themes you're going to be looking for? Maybe Mo Brooks in Alabama?
Yeah, Mo Brooks in Alabama, John. That's exactly what I was going to say. Can he pull it off? That would speak more than the Kemp issue, honestly. If Mo Brooks can win, despite the fact that Trump took away the endorsement from a guy, and once again, if Mo Brooks wins tonight in Alabama, that's going to say something. That's going to say that, look, if you're a real conservative guy, Mo Brooks is a total conservative. Or as Trump would say, he's a total conservative. Well, actually, maybe Trump won't say that now. But the point is that he is. And that's the point, that if he can win, that just shows that Trump has to be careful.
Right.
If you're a rhino, it's one thing. It's different if you're true-blooded conservative. What am I trying to say? Anyhow, it's a Tuesday. Then again, it could be a Wednesday. It wouldn't matter. So.
All right. David, great to have you on this Election Tuesday. Thanks.
You too, Jenna. Thanks, John.
Well, President Biden is back in the White House after his 6-day tour in Asia, though his efforts to boost Asian alliances prompted a show of aggressive force from rivals Russia and China. Yeah, his visit comes as key analysts say the president's focus should be on North Korea. CBN News correspondent Brody Carter joins us with more on that. Brody?
John, Jenna, the president's final day in East Asia was highlighted by a joint military exercise in which Russia and China flew missile carriers and a nuclear-capable bomber over the waters of the Sea of Japan and the East China Sea as well. U.S. officials say it was a show of force, with President Biden visiting in the region.
The fact of the matter is that we have a lot of work to do, keeping this region peaceful and stable.
President Biden framed his trip to Asia as a chance to strengthen Asian alliances amid growing tensions coming out of China.
In a short time, we've shown the Quad isn't just a passing fad. We mean business.
The Quadrilateral Security Dialogue Coalition, or the Quad, is comprised of Australia, India, Japan, and the United States. Its focus is bolstering Indo-Pacific relationships during a time where Chinese military exercises continually threaten the democratic island of Taiwan. Mr. Biden's explicit warning to China took the spotlight after saying the U.S. will respond militarily if the country invades.
Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes.
You are?
That's the commitment we made.
Taiwan's president thanked Mr. Biden for his support, while the White House quickly downplayed his comments, saying they don't reflect a change in U.S. policy of strategic ambiguity.
I stated that when I made my statement yesterday.
Michael O'Hanlon with the Brookings Institute says the president's repeated gaffes say otherwise.
I think it's a small change when President Biden has made the same kind of statement on multiple occasions. And so if the White House walks it back, but Biden keeps saying it.
Earlier in the trip to South Korea, Biden said he would consider meeting with Kim Jong-un, which did not happen. Meanwhile, Mr. Biden strengthened ties with South Korea, set to resume military exercises that were canceled by former President Trump.
Despite being a Democrat and a Trump critic myself, that President Trump was onto something with North Korea. Biden's fallen back on sort of Obama policy, which is ignore them and just hope for the best. I'm a little bit discouraged about that part. On the other hand, Biden did a good job with the overall U.S.-Japan, U.S.-Korea alliances, so I give him higher marks on that.
Another presidential statement drawing scrutiny was made when President Biden said record high gas prices are part of a, quote, incredible transition, and that when it's all over, the world will be less reliant on fossil fuels. Some believe his green energy policies are driving that statement. While others came to the president's aid, they said those gas prices, they're up worldwide and has nothing to do with President Joe Biden. Jenna?
All right, thank you, Brody. Well, the United States issued a major blow to Russia's ability to wage its war in Ukraine, cutting off its ability to pay billions in debt using American banks. Meanwhile, Russian forces are trying to hold their ground in the eastern Donbass as their offensive appears to be stalled. In the southern port city of Mariupol, Ukrainian authorities say they've discovered at least 200 bodies in the rubble. The news comes on the heels of a Russian diplomat to the United Nations resigning his post over the war, saying he is, quote, ashamed of his country. The UN now estimates more than 6.5 million Ukrainians have fled the fighting there.
A new report blowing the cover of a major sexual abuse scandal among Southern Baptists. The details next.
Well, welcome back. After years of hiding alleged abuse within the church, Southern Baptist leaders issued a long overdue apology to victims and announced it will release the names of alleged abusers within the ranks of the largest Protestant denomination in America.
It's the latest move following an explosive report detailing claims of sexual abuse in Southern Baptist churches. Heather Sells reports.
The report says that abuse survivors and advocates have reached out to top Southern Baptist leaders for almost 20 years. Those leaders, however, met them with, quote, resistance, stonewalling, and even outright hostility.
It's a culture of protecting power and position. It's not a culture that Jesus would model for us of caring for the least of these.
Southern Baptist President Ed Litton says he's shocked, disappointed, and dismayed by the report, which focused on the executive committee. It identified a few staff in control of responding to reports of abuse: General Counsel August Botto and outside counsel Gunther Jordan and Price. The report says they ignored or discounted victims' claims and cited the Baptist principle of church autonomy as their reason for failing to take action.
There were chances, going many years back to do the right thing.
Task Force Chair Bruce Frank says they were wrong to use it as an excuse.
Autonomy is certainly a cherished value, and it is our polity. That is in no means to say you can't have accountability and communication.
Other bombshell revelations, what the report calls credible allegations that former SBC President Johnny Hunt sexually assaulted a pastor's wife, a claim Hunt denies. Also, the existence of an executive committee database with the names of hundreds of abusers. The report said it found no indication that Botto or anyone else took action to remove the accused abusers from their positions of power in SBC churches. The report has rocked the Southern Baptist world and those who've left it. Russell Moore saying the investigation uncovered more evil than even I imagined. Southern Baptist Seminary head Al Mohler saying the weight of truth calls for a concerted determination to make things right. Litton, who is stepping down next month, says that ultimately the report shows who's really in charge of the convention because its messengers called for the independent report.
It's the power of a grassroots people who for 2 days a year gather in the largest deliberative body in the world, and they literally can set the course and direction of that denomination.
Right now, he says the first concern must be for abuse survivors.
They have been brutalized by physical assaults and attacks by people that should have been trustworthy and in the context of churches. But then to face the kind of resistance and sometimes out-and-out attack, according to the report, is unthinkable.
Next month, the convention holds its annual meeting in Anaheim. It will receive this report and decide what next steps to take. Heather Ursell, CBN News.
All right, thank you. Great reporting, Heather. When we come back, the push for digital identities, protecting against fraud, or the precursor to a surveillance state? Next on Fake Nation.
Well, imagine a state where the government keeps tabs on everywhere you go, everything you say, and everything you buy through a digital identity system.
Well, it might sound like communist China, but the European Union may be headed in the same direction. And as Dale Hurd reports, the idea actually is gaining support in the United States Congress.
Is the European Union on its way to becoming a surveillance society like China?
The European Digital Identity.
This cheery introduction to the EU's upcoming digital identity program tells citizens that it will make their lives easier while keeping them safer online.
The European Digital Identity Wallet will enable us to store and exchange documents and legal information while fully controlling which data we want to share with whom.
ID data sent.
EU President Ursula von der Leyen says digital identities will give citizens control over how their personal data is used and will help stop identity theft. The so-called digital wallet will be an app on a person's phone and will contain only the information a person wants it to include, such as medical or financial information.
Credit rating sent. Income statement sent.
It's already under attack in the European Parliament as something that would be ripe for government abuse. One of its chief critics, European Parliament member Christian Turres, was born in communist Romania and has long been warning of the EU's so-called Chinification.
Clearly, we are witnessing right now the Chinification of Europe, because we see what is happening in China right now with the social credit score, where the government is monitoring and surveilling all the people from the beginning to end. Everything that they do, everything, everywhere where they walk, they control everything and they watch everything. This is the example of a tyranny.
The EU insists the digital identity program will be voluntary. Skeptics are wondering how long before it becomes mandatory.
How voluntary is the European Digital Identity Wallet? But even more important, how voluntary will it remain in the future? Because the European Union always comes up with nice plans to eventually abuse it, to create more control.
The EU's COVID passport was supposed to be temporary. Now Brussels wants to extend it until at least June of next year. COVID passports have been used to prevent the unvaccinated from crossing borders, entering grocery stores, using public transit, and even going to their jobs. It's helped fuel violent demonstrations, the likes of which Europe hasn't seen for decades. Some in Washington are urging Joe Biden to establish digital identities for Americans as a way of fighting identity theft. There's also support in Congress. The so-called Improving Digital Identity Act of 2020 never made it to a vote, but could be revived. We asked an expert on digital identities if they are indeed a necessary safeguard against identity theft. The Director of Engineering at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Alexis Hancock, not only said no, but said digital IDs are more likely to encourage identity theft.
I think this actually increases the attack vector. This makes you a bigger target in my eyes, especially if in a government issue digital identity. When you have something on the internet for a long time, there's an increased potential of it being breached in some fashion because of this long-term storage. And when you're able to associate something like that with a particular person, you can pivot from that long-term identifier to other information about them and compromise, say, your bank accounts or compromise some sort of information about you.
Not only are digital IDs coming to Europe, but in Italy, the cities of Rome and Bologna have begun social credit programs that reward citizens for behavior that officials think will fight climate change, like using a bicycle instead of a car. A social credit system could be easily incorporated into a digital identity. Austrian Catholic leader Alexander Chukwuel says that in any European social credit system, Christians will lose because of their opposition to issues like abortion that the EU views as a human right.
Therefore, I do not want the European Union to have the possibility to look into everything I do, everything I say, everything I have, and how I move and where I am at any time. Those systems are pushed by people who are highly anti-Christian.
Torres warns that the EU's new digital ID is the next step in a process in which the government in Brussels will micromanage every aspect of people's lives.
This is what makes the difference between a tyranny and democracy. When you know everything about what your government does, that's democracy. When the government knows everything about you, that is tyranny.
Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Still ahead, New York City goes unplugged, saying farewell to a nostalgic city lifeline.
And finally tonight, hanging up on a bygone era. Public payphones have been on the outs since cell phones were introduced in the late 90s.
Yeah, and this week, the last public payphone was unplugged in New York City. What used to be a primary tool for New Yorkers now replaced with nearly 2,000 kiosks offering free Wi-Fi and charging stations for smartphones. There is good news, though, for the nostalgic. You'll still be able to find private payphones and old-school phone booths around the city. And as for that last standing public payphone, it will be rehomed at the Museum of the City of New York.
Put to good use there. I do think it makes more sense to have the charging stations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For today, it does.
Well, thanks for watching.
Have a great night.